Here is the real reason life is about to get much harder in America. And it is not what you think. You have noticed that people are different. Ruder, colder, staring through you at the register. Fighting in the produce aisle. You have blamed the generation, or the phones, or 2020. But researchers at Harvard and Princeton documented what is actually happening, and it is far more disturbing than bad manners. When people with money worries were asked to think about a $1,500 car repair, their cognitive performance dropped by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. Not their mood, their measurable ability to think. The same deficit you get from losing an entire night of sleep or from chronic alcoholism. Wealthy people asked the same question, showed no effect at all. Same people, same brains, different bank balance. And they replicated it on 464 sugarcane farmers in India, testing them before harvest when they were broke and after harvest when they were paid. Same farmers, same tests, dramatically different capacity. That is what is happening to this country right now, and almost nobody has connected it. People are not meaner, they are operating with less brain, and that is measurable. Let me lay this out properly. Because once you understand it, you will not be able to see a rude cashier the same way again. And I mean that as a genuine relief rather than a scolding. In 2013, an economist named Economists Mullainathan and a psychologist named Shafir published research in the journal Science, along with colleagues Anandi Mani and Jiang Zhao. The paper is called Poverty Impedes Cognitive Function, and what they found overturns almost everything people assume about why the poor and the stressed behave the way they do. Here is the first experiment. They set up in a New Jersey shopping mall and recruited ordinary shoppers across income levels. They gave everyone a hypothetical scenario. Your car needs repairs. And then they gave them cognitive tests, standard measures of reasoning and attention. For half the participants, the repair was small, $150. For the other half, it was $1,500. With the small problem, wealthy and poor participants performed about the same, no meaningful difference. With the large problem, the wealthy participants were unaffected, and the poor participants showed significant cognitive impairment. The measured drop was roughly 13 IQ points, and in some reporting of the results, closer to 14. To put that in perspective, the way the researchers themselves did, that is the difference between the categories of superior and average intelligence. Or, more pointedly, between average and borderline deficient. It is a larger deficit than subjects typically show in sleep studies after being awake for 24 hours straight. One summary compared it to the cognitive effect of chronic alcoholism. And here is the crucial detail. Nobody actually lost any money, nobody paid for a repair. They were simply asked to think about one. The mere act of contemplating a financial problem they could not solve consumed enough mental capacity to measurably impair them. Now, a shopping mall study is easy to dismiss, so they went and did it in the real world. They tested 464 sugarcane farmers in Tamil Nadu, India. Sugarcane is harvested once a year, and these farmers rely on that harvest for at least 60% of their annual income, which means the same person is genuinely poor in the months before harvest and comparatively flush in the months after. They gave the same farmers the same tests before and after. The farmers performed significantly better after harvest than before. Same people, same tests, same fields. The only variable was whether money was tight, and the researchers checked the obvious alternative explanations. It was not differences in available time, not nutrition, not work effort, and notably, not stress in the simple sense, because although the farmers did show more stress before harvest, that alone did not account for the cognitive drop. So what is the mechanism? They call it a bandwidth tax. Think of your mind like a computer running programs. Financial worry is not a feeling that sits off to the side. It is a program running constantly in the background, consuming processing power, whether you are aware of it or not, and it does not shut off when you walk into the grocery store or clock in for your shift. The researchers were explicit about what this means. As Mullainathan and Shafir put it, we do not lose any inherent capacities. We just lose access to the full complement ordinarily available for use. And then they made the claim that I think is the single most important idea in this entire video. Qualities we routinely treat as someone's basic character, impulsiveness, poor decisions, short temper, disorganization, may in fact be products of a pervasive feeling of scarcity. Not who they are, what is happening to them. Now hold that thought because I am about to show you what happens when you apply it to 60% of a country at the same time. But first, one more finding from that research, because it is the one that reframes how you should think about your own behavior, not just everyone else's. The most striking thing about their work, and the part that was genuinely controversial in some circles, is not what it says about poverty. It is the assertion that scarcity affects anyone in its grip. Anyone, not a category of person, a condition. Which means this is not a study about poor people that comfortable people can read with sympathy from a distance. The same effect shows up with scarcity of time, of sleep, of social connection. If you have ever been in a stretch where you were working too much and sleeping too little and everything felt urgent, and you noticed that you were snapping at people you love and forgetting obvious things and making decisions you would normally never make, you were experiencing the same mechanism. You were not becoming a worse person. You were operating with less of yourself available, and that has a specific implication for how you interpret your own recent behavior. A lot of people watching this have been harder to live with over the last few years than they used to be. Shorter with their spouse, less patient with their kids, less inclined to call anybody back. And a lot of them have quietly concluded that something is wrong with them, or that they are becoming bitter, or that this is just what getting older is. There is a decent chance that is not what happened. There is a decent chance you have been running a background program continuously for 4 years, and it has been consuming the capacity you use to spend on being pleasant, and the person you think you have become is actually just the person you are when a portion of your mind is permanently occupied. That distinction matters enormously, because one of those is a character problem you have to fix about yourself, and the other is a load problem you can reduce. And there is a genuinely hopeful thing buried in the sugarcane study that almost nobody mentions when they cite it. The farmers got their capacity back. After harvest, when the pressure lifted, they tested better. It was not permanent damage. The bandwidth returned when the tax was removed, which means that a great deal of what looks like permanent decline in the people around you, and possibly in yourself, is recoverable, and the thing that recovers it is relief of pressure rather than moral effort. This explains the cashier who would not look at you, and it is not what you assumed. Go back to the thing everybody has noticed. You walk up to the register and say, "Hey, how are you?" The way people in this country have said it for 100 years, and you get nothing. No eye contact, no word, just a hand taking your card, and you walk out thinking, what is wrong with people? Let me give you the other half of that transaction, because there is now serious data on it, and it is not the data you would expect. Researchers at Harvard's Shift Project have been surveying hourly service sector workers at large retail and food establishments since 2016, tens of thousands of workers, and they looked specifically at self-checkout and understaffing. Here is what they found. Workers in stores with self-checkout machines are 14% more likely to say they are never or rarely treated with respect by customers, and 12% more likely to say they are always or often bullied in customer interactions. 61% of workers in stores with self-checkout report there is always or often insufficient staff to get the work done. Now, layer on the aggression data, and this is from 2026. A study of 1,500 American frontline workers conducted in April of this year found that 42% had personally experienced customer aggression at work at least once in the past 4 weeks. Not in the past year. In the past 4 weeks. Nearly 40% said customer aggression had increased over the preceding 12 months. 86% said customer abuse or aggression increased their stress or anxiety at work in the last year. And here is the number that answers your question directly. 84% said they have become more cautious or avoidant with customers. 84%. Read that again, because it is the entire explanation for the silent cashier. The person who will not make eye contact with you is not necessarily rude, entitled, or badly raised. In a great many cases, they are a person who has learned, through repeated experience, that engaging with customers is how you get screamed at. They are not ignoring you. They are protecting themselves. And the data says most of them are doing it. A separate survey of 21,000 frontline employees found that 53% of workers who deal directly with the public had recently encountered customers who were verbally abusive, threatening, or unruly. Another study found more than 1 in 3 retail workers reported feeling unsafe at work, up from 27% the year before, and that 1 in 4 had thought about looking for a new job over safety concerns. And on the other side, a majority said their employers do not follow up. Only 14% reported receiving any follow-up after flagging a serious incident. 39% said abuse is treated at their workplace as just part of the job. Now let me connect it to the staffing, because this is the loop. More than half of retail workers say their stores are understaffed more often than not during busy times. 73% stay late to fill coverage gaps. So the sequence runs like this. The company cuts labor hours to protect margin. The store is understaffed. The line gets long. The shelf is not restocked. Nobody can answer your question. The customer, who is already stressed for reasons of their own, gets frustrated and takes it out on the only company representative in the room, who is a person earning near minimum wage with no authority over any of it. That worker becomes avoidant. The customer experiences the avoidance as rudeness, and the next customer walks in already primed for a fight. Nobody in that loop decided to be cold. Every person in it is responding rationally to the situation they were placed in by a staffing decision made in a corporate office by someone who will never stand in that line. And the trade group data underneath it is stark. Between 2019 and 2023, the number of cashiers working in grocery stores fell by 2.4%, while the overall number of workers in grocery stores grew by 4.4%. The store got busier. The number of people whose job is to face you went down. You are not imagining that there is nobody to help you. There is nobody to help you. That was a choice, and it was not the cashiers. Tunneling is why people stopped seeing you at all. There is a second concept in that research that I think explains even more of what people are describing, and it has a name that makes it instantly recognizable once you hear it. The researchers call it tunneling. When you are under scarcity, your attention narrows onto the immediate problem, and the analogy they use is a tunnel. Inside the tunnel, you see with unusual clarity. Everything directly ahead is sharp, but everything in the periphery becomes invisible. That is not a metaphor for being distracted. It is a description of what attention actually does under pressure, and it has consequences that look exactly like character flaws. Think about what falls into the periphery. The neighbor's flat tire that you drive past, the person struggling with a heavy door, the friend who has not called in a while, the birthday you forgot, the thank you note you meant to write, the invitation you never RSVP'd to, the guy at the salvage yard you would normally have chatted with. Every one of those is a peripheral thing, and every single one of them is what people mean when they say nobody is neighborly anymore. Here is a concrete example. Somebody described sitting in his garage with 2 trucks and a full set of tools, watching a man drive past on a flat rim with his hazards on. And the man did not stop. And he said, all he had to do was pull in, and I would have had him on the road in 10 minutes. Now, the obvious reading is that the driver did not want to bother anyone, and that is probably part of it. But consider the other possibility. That driver was inside a tunnel. Flat tire, no money for a tow, has to be at work, phone battery low, already behind on rent. Inside that tunnel, there is exactly one thing: get home. A stranger's open garage is peripheral information, and peripheral information is not being processed. He did not choose not to see it. He could not see it. And the same logic explains the party that everyone showed up to late and empty-handed. Somebody described inviting friends 2 weeks in advance, cleaning the house, preparing, and every single person arriving hours late with nothing in their hands. That reads as disrespect, and I understand entirely why it hurt. But look at what bringing a gift to a host requires. It requires remembering the event exists in advance, planning around it, having discretionary money, and having the mental space to think about someone else's experience of an evening rather than just getting yourself there. Every one of those is bandwidth, and the bandwidth tax hits exactly those functions first. I want to be careful here because I am not excusing rudeness, and I am not saying nobody is responsible for their behavior. Plenty of people are simply inconsiderate and always were. And a person under stress who screams at a cashier has still done something wrong, and understanding why does not make it acceptable. But there is a difference between excusing and explaining, and the difference matters enormously for how you feel walking around your own town. Because if you believe people got worse, you conclude that your society is populated by bad people, and there is nothing to be done except withdraw. And a lot of people in this country have made exactly that conclusion and are now sitting at home with the door shut. If you understand that a large fraction of people around you are operating under a documented cognitive load equivalent to a lost night of sleep, you conclude something completely different. You conclude that they are struggling, that it is largely invisible, and that a small amount of grace costs you almost nothing and occasionally does something enormous for someone. Same behavior observed, completely different response available. Something genuinely did change in 2020, and the nurses are not imagining it. Now I want to take seriously the thing that comes up in every one of these conversations, which is that people have been different since 2020. 2 different nurses, independently, described the same observation. And a lot of people dismiss that as nostalgia or as pandemic politics. I do not think it is either. But I also do not think the explanation people reach for is right, so let me separate the parts. The speculation that keeps coming up is that people did not get enough oxygen to their brains. I have looked at this and I want to be straight with you. For the general population, that is not what the evidence supports as a broad explanation for social behavior. There is genuine research on cognitive effects following severe illness, particularly in people who are hospitalized, and that is real for those individuals, but it does not account for a whole society's manners changing, including in people who were never sick. Here is what does account for it, and there are 3 mechanisms, all documented, and none of them require anyone to be damaged. The first is skill atrophy. Social behavior is a practice skill, not a fixed trait. Reading a face, managing a pause, calibrating tone, making small talk with a stranger, all of it is maintained through repetition. Remove the repetition for a year or 2, and it degrades, exactly like anything else you stop doing. Surveys of remote workers have found a substantial share reporting their own social skills declined. That is, people noticing it in themselves, and it hit hardest at the ages where those skills are formed rather than maintained. A person who was 19 in 2020 lost the exact window in which most people learn how to operate as an adult in public, which is precisely why the complaint keeps landing on that age group and why one young woman in her early 20s made a video asking why nobody in her own age bracket knows how to speak. She was not being told this by an older person. She noticed it about her peers. The second is that the physical settings where casual interaction happens were removed and largely not rebuilt. Fewer cashiers, more kiosks, automated phone systems, self-checkout, ordering by app. Every one of those transactions used to be a small human exchange, and thousands of them a year were quietly deleted from ordinary life. You cannot maintain a skill in an environment that no longer requires it. And the third is the one we have been building toward, which is that the financial squeeze arrived at the same moment. Cumulative price increases, housing, insurance, healthcare, all landing on a population that then had less bandwidth for everything peripheral, which is where courtesy lives. 3 separate mechanisms, all pointing the same direction, all arriving simultaneously. You do not need a mystery to explain the outcome. There is one more thing worth saying, and it is the hardest. Several people in these conversations described their own response, which was to withdraw, to wear headphones in the store, to stop speaking to people because it has gone badly too many times. To stay in the walled backyard with the pool and the people they already know. I understand it completely, and I want to name what it costs, gently, because the people doing it are not wrong to be tired. Every person who withdraws makes the environment slightly colder for everyone still in it. Not because they owe anyone anything, because the perceived temperature of a public space is made entirely out of how the people in it behave. 20 people withdrawing from a grocery store produces exactly the atmosphere that makes the 21st person decide to withdraw too. That is a doom loop, and it runs on entirely reasonable individual decisions. Men are afraid to say good morning now, and that is a real loss nobody wanted. I want to address something that came up and that I think a lot of men watching this will recognize immediately, because it is rarely discussed honestly. A man described being afraid to greet a woman in public, worried he will be seen as a predator for saying good morning. Keeping his hands visible, keeping his distance, and then worrying that keeping his hands behind his back reads as hiding something. That is a real experience, and it is worth taking apart rather than turning into a culture war argument, because there is a genuine social loss in it, and it did not come from anybody's ill intent. Here is what happened, in the least inflammatory terms I can manage. Over the past decade, there was a broad and largely overdue reckoning with harassment, which made a lot of previously tolerated behavior socially unacceptable. That was necessary, and it made public life meaningfully safer for a lot of people. But norms do not update with precision. When a boundary shifts, the people most anxious about getting it wrong tend to overcorrect, and the overcorrection lands on the most cautious rather than the least. Which means the men who were never the problem are frequently the ones who stopped speaking, while the men who were the problem largely did not change. That is the perverse outcome, and it is worth naming without turning it into a grievance about the original correction. And the second factor is unfamiliarity. A friendly greeting from a stranger is read very differently in a place where that is normal than in a place where it is not. In much of this country, particularly outside the South and small towns, the ambient expectation is that strangers do not address each other. So a greeting that would be entirely unremarkable in one town reads as an approach in another, and the person receiving it does a quick threat assessment, because that is what people do in unfamiliar situations. None of that is anybody's fault. It is what happens when a large country loses its shared script. So practically what actually works, because I do not want to just describe the problem. Context does most of the work. A greeting in a grocery aisle, in daylight, with other people around, at a normal volume, while continuing to do your own thing, reads completely differently from the same words in an empty parking garage. Most of the anxiety on both sides is about context rather than content. Brief is better than sustained. Good morning, and then moving on communicates courtesy. Good morning followed by standing there communicates something else, whether you intend it or not. Do not take the non-response personally. Given the 84% avoidance figure we discussed, and given that many people are inside a tunnel, a non-answer is very rarely about you, and here is the one I would emphasize most. Address the situation rather than the person. Something about the weather, the line, the store, the price of something on the shelf, it gives the other person an easy exit, and it is functionally impossible to misread. That is why the classic small talk topics are what they are. They were not chosen for their fascinating content. They were chosen because they are safe openings between strangers, and that is a genuine social technology that we are in the process of losing. There is one more thing here worth saying plainly. The loss of casual public interaction between strangers is not a trivial etiquette problem. In a country with a weak formal safety net, the informal one is built out of exactly those small contacts. The neighbor who knows your face is the neighbor who notices your car has not moved in 3 days. That is not sentiment, that is infrastructure, and it is made out of good mornings. A teacher noticed 3 things in children this year, and each one has a documented source. An English teacher listed 3 things she has observed in children this year that worry her. Boys as young as 6 making misogynistic and racist comments. Girls as young as 12 using anti-aging skincare. And young girls adopting the entire personalities of adult women influencers. Each of those is real, each one is being documented by researchers, and each one has a traceable mechanism. And I think it is worth going through them carefully rather than landing on the easy answer, which is that parents are failing, because parents are part of it, but they are not most of it, and understanding the rest is what actually gives a parent something to do. Take the 6-year-old repeating things he should not know. That child is not developing an ideology. 6-year-olds do not have ideologies. He is repeating language he heard, and the question is where. Some of it is at home, and that is the traditional answer. But the newer mechanism is the recommendation algorithm. Content platforms do not serve children what their parents would choose. They serve what maximizes watch time, and the systems learn very quickly that provocation holds attention better than gentleness. A child who watches a few gaming videos gets recommended edgier gaming videos, and the drift happens over months in a direction nobody selected. That is the crucial part. No adult chose it, not the parent, and not really anyone at the company either. An optimization system found that the fastest route to engagement runs through outrage, and children are inside that system for hours a day. Now the 12-year-olds using anti-aging products. Dermatologists have been publicly warning about this, because the actives in adult skincare, retinoids, and strong acids are genuinely inappropriate for young skin and are producing irritation and barrier damage in children who have nothing to treat. Why is it happening? Because those products are marketed through beauty content, and the content is served to 12-year-olds by the same recommendation systems, and the message underneath all of it is that your face is a problem requiring products. A 12-year-old has no defense against that framing, because she has not yet developed the ability to recognize marketing as marketing. Adults barely have it. And the third one, girls adopting the whole personality of an adult influencer, is the same mechanism at a deeper level. Children have always imitated adults. That is how humans learn. What changed is who the available adults are. For most of human history, a child's models were the adults physically around them. Parents, relatives, teachers, neighbors, the people at church. Those were ordinary people living ordinary lives at close range, and crucially, a child could see the whole of them, including the boring parts and the bad days. Now a substantial share of the models are people performing an edited version of a life for an audience, optimized for engagement, whose income depends on being watched. A child imitating that is not imitating a person, she is imitating a product. So what does a parent or grandparent actually do? Delay the phone. This is the single highest leverage decision available, and it is enormously hard socially because your child will be the only one, which is exactly why the most effective approach is collective. Talk to the parents of your child's friends and agree together on an age. A rule that 3 families follow is survivable for a kid in a way that a rule 1 family follows is not. Separate the device from the algorithm. A phone that texts and calls is a fundamentally different object from a phone that runs recommendation feeds. Those are frequently treated as one decision, and they are 2. Keep devices out of bedrooms overnight, which is the single most evidence-supported specific rule, because it protects sleep, and sleep is the foundation under everything else including mood and impulse control. Watch with them rather than monitoring from a distance. A child who can show you what they are watching without being punished for it will show you things that surveillance would never surface, and be an available adult. This is the one grandparents in particular can do that nobody else can. A child with several real adults paying real attention to them is dramatically less susceptible to adopting a stranger's personality because the models closest to them are actual people who know their name. Nobody knows what an extension cord is anymore, and that one is on all of us. Somebody described walking into a Walmart, asking an employee where the extension cords were, and being told, "I do not know what that is." And the immediate reaction is that this is a story about a young person being useless. I want to argue it is a story about something we did to ourselves, and that it is one of the few things on this list that is genuinely fixable by ordinary people this month. Here is what actually happened, and it happened over about 40 years. Practical skills used to transmit through unavoidable proximity. You learned to change a tire because you were in the car when your father changed one. You learned what an extension cord was because you handed one to somebody. You learned to patch drywall, start a fire, sharpen a blade, wire a lamp, and read a tape measure because you were standing next to an adult doing it, probably being mildly annoyed about it. Several things removed that shop class disappeared from an enormous number of American schools, cut in budget rounds through the 80s and 90s on the theory that everyone was heading to college and would not need it. The default cultural advice for 2 straight generations was that working with your hands was what you did if you could not do better, which was both untrue and destructive, and we are now short hundreds of thousands of tradespeople because of it. Homes filled up with things that cannot be repaired by their owners, which we have discussed, so there was nothing to learn on, and parents got squeezed. A household where both adults work full-time and commute has dramatically fewer unhurried Saturday hours in the garage, and the transmission of practical knowledge happens almost entirely in unhurried hours. It is not taught, it is absorbed alongside. So the 20-year-old who does not know what an extension cord is did not refuse to learn. Nobody was standing next to him with one. And I want to be fair about something. Every generation has known things the next one did not, and every older generation has found this alarming. My grandparents could butcher a hog and preserve a winter's food. I cannot. That skill died in my family and nobody made a video about it. But there is a version of this that is genuinely different now, and it is the specific loss of what you might call household self-sufficiency, at the exact moment when the cost of paying someone else has become the thing crushing people. That is the connection. It is not a manners problem, it is an economic one. A person who cannot change their own furnace filter, patch a wall, replace a faucet washer, or diagnose a check engine light is paying someone for every one of those, in an economy where labor is the most expensive thing there is. The skill gap converts directly into money. So here is the useful part, and it cuts both directions. If you are the person who knows things, teach somebody, deliberately, not by complaining that nobody knows anything, which accomplishes nothing, but by asking a young person to hold the light while you do the job and explaining what you are doing. That is the entire transmission mechanism, and it has always been the entire mechanism. It requires proximity and patience, and nothing else. If you have grandchildren, this is the single most valuable thing you have to give them that nobody else will. Not money. The ability to fix things. And the research on it is not complicated. A kid who has successfully repaired one thing believes they can repair things, and that belief generalizes. If you are the person who does not know things, you can learn essentially all of it now for free, from video, and the barrier is not access. It is being willing to be a beginner in public, at 40 or 50 or 60, which is uncomfortable and which almost nobody does. Start with the 5 that pay for themselves immediately. Change a tire, shut off your water main, reset a breaker and know which is which. Replace a furnace filter. Read a tape measure, then add the ones that save real money. Basic drywall patching. Replacing a toilet flapper, which is a $4 part that fixes the most common cause of a high water bill. Replacing a faucet cartridge. Changing your own wiper blades, air filter and cabin filter, which shops mark up several hundred%. None of that requires talent. It requires a willingness to be bad at something for 20 minutes. And here is the part that connects back to everything else in this video. The reason those skills are worth having is not only the money, it is that competence is one of the few reliable sources of calm available to a person under pressure. Somebody who knows they can handle a flat tire, a dead breaker, or a leak has removed an entire category of dread from their life. In a period where a great many people are operating with reduced bandwidth and rising anxiety, every problem you know how to solve yourself is one less thing running in the background of your mind. Here is why it gets harder from here, and the loop is the problem. Now let me answer the actual question in the title, which is why this gets harder rather than better. Because everything I have described so far is a diagnosis, and the diagnosis has a trajectory. The reason it gets worse is that every mechanism in this feeds the others. Start with the bandwidth tax. Financial pressure consumes cognitive capacity. That is established. Now consider what people do with reduced capacity. The research is specific about this too. Under scarcity, people tunnel. They optimize for the immediate crisis and everything long-term falls out of view. Which means, concretely, they make worse financial decisions. They take the payday loan because the tunnel contains this week's rent. They skip the preventive appointment because the tunnel does not contain a problem that has not happened yet. They do not shop the insurance renewal, do not check the 401k allocation, do not file for the exemption they qualify for. And every one of those decisions makes next month's financial pressure worse, which further reduces bandwidth, which produces more of the same decisions. The researchers were blunt about the implication. Being poor saps the very mental energy needed to take on the tasks that might lead out of poverty, such as education, job training, and time management. And they were explicit that this is not a character trait. As Shafir put it, when you are poor, you cannot say, "I have had enough. I am not going to be poor anymore." It is not a choice you are making. You are reduced to few options. Then layer the social loop on top of the financial one. Stressed people are less patient in public. Less patience produces more conflict. More conflict produces more avoidance by workers. More avoidance is experienced as coldness. Coldness makes the next person less inclined to extend themselves, and people withdraw, which removes them from the informal networks that would have caught them. And then the third loop, which closes the circle. In a country where the formal safety net is thin, the informal one is the actual backstop. So the withdrawal produced by stress removes the very resource that stress makes you need. The moment you most need somebody to call is the moment you have gone 6 months without calling anybody. 3 loops, all reinforcing, all running at once. Now here is what makes me say it gets harder rather than that it is already bad. None of the underlying pressures are scheduled to ease. Housing costs are not reverting. Insurance is not reverting. Healthcare is not reverting. The service jobs are being thinned further, not restored. And the additional pressure of automation is arriving on top of a workforce that is already running with reduced bandwidth, which means people will be asked to retrain, adapt, and make good long-term decisions at precisely the moment their capacity for long-term decisions is most impaired. That is the actual crisis, and it is why I titled this the way I did. It is not that things cost more. It is that things cost more, and the cost of things is measurably degrading the collective ability to respond intelligently to things costing more. A country of people operating at 13 IQ points below capacity, tunneled onto this week, avoiding each other, is not a country that adapts well to anything. And I want to say clearly that this is not a moral failure of the American people. It is a predictable physiological and cognitive response to sustained material pressure documented in a peer-reviewed paper in Science, replicated on 2 continents, and confirmed on the same individuals measured before and after their circumstances changed. Same farmers, same tests. Different capacity. That is the real reason. What actually works when your own bandwidth is the thing that is compromised. So let me get practical, because the research does not just diagnose, it has direct implications for what actually helps, and they are different from normal financial advice in an important way. Normal financial advice assumes you have the bandwidth to execute it. Make a budget, comparison shop, plan ahead, be disciplined. Every one of those requires the exact resource that scarcity taxes. Which is why telling a stressed person to just be more disciplined is not only unkind, it is technically wrong. You are asking someone to solve a bandwidth problem using bandwidth. The approach that actually works is to reduce the number of decisions, rather than to make better ones. Automate everything you possibly can. Automatic transfers to savings on payday before you see the money. Automatic bill payment for every fixed obligation. Automatic retirement contributions. Every automated decision is a decision permanently removed from your load, and it keeps working on the weeks when you have nothing left. Do the important things when your bandwidth is highest, not when the deadline arrives. That means doing the insurance shopping, the plan comparison, the exemption paperwork on a calm Saturday morning rather than in a crisis. The research is clear that decisions made inside the tunnel are systematically worse, so the goal is to make consequential decisions outside it. Use checklists rather than memory. This is what surgeons and pilots do, and they do it precisely because expertise does not protect you from a cognitive load problem. A written list of what has to happen this month is not a sign that you are disorganized. It is bandwidth stored outside your head. Reduce the number of accounts, cards, subscriptions, and moving parts. Every one is a small ongoing tax. Consolidation is not just tidiness, it is capacity recovery. Ask for help earlier than feels comfortable. Utilities, lenders, and hospitals all have hardship programs, and every one of them offers dramatically better terms to someone who calls before they are delinquent than after. But calling early requires exactly the forward-looking planning that the tunnel eliminates, which is why almost nobody does it. Put it on the calendar now. And then there is the part that is not financial at all, and I think it is the most important. Protect your sleep, seriously and practically. The research compares the cognitive effect of scarcity to losing a full night of sleep, which means if you are financially stressed and sleep-deprived, you are stacking two identical impairments. Sleep is the one input that is free and that directly restores the resource being taxed. Reduce the total number of open loops in your life. Every unresolved thing you are carrying, the unopened mail, the appointment you have not made, the conversation you have been avoiding, occupies bandwidth continuously. Closing small loops recovers capacity out of proportion to how minor they seem. And be around people even when you do not feel like it. And especially then, withdrawal feels like conserving energy, and it functions as removing your safety net. Now let me say the last thing, and it is directed at how you move through the world rather than how you manage your money. Knowing all of this changes what a rude cashier means. It changes what a driver flipping you off means. It changes what a friend who did not show up means. It does not mean you have to accept mistreatment or that nobody is responsible for their behavior. It means that before you conclude that people have simply gotten worse, there is a documented, replicated, peer-reviewed alternative explanation sitting right there, and it accounts for the evidence better. Somebody in one of these conversations described being lost in a department store at 26, not knowing how to pick out a suit, having never been taught, and a man who worked there spending 2 hours walking him through it. Ties, cufflinks, when to wear a bow tie. He said he remembers that man to this day. That man had bandwidth and he spent it on a stranger. That is the entire thing, not a policy, not a movement. A person with a little capacity choosing to spend some of it on somebody who had none. If you are watching this and you are doing okay, if your bills are covered and you slept last night and your mind is your own, you are carrying something a lot of people around you currently do not have. And the cheapest, highest return thing you can do with it is to be the one who is patient in the line, who says good morning, who holds the door, who calls the friend who has gone quiet. Not because you owe anybody, because it is the only intervention available that works on a doom loop, and because somebody did it for you once and you probably still remember them. Take care of yourselves out there. And if you do one thing after this, make it the smallest one. The next time somebody is short with you in a store, assume they are carrying something you cannot see. You will be right most of the time, and on the occasions you are wrong, it will not have cost you anything.